Thursday, a week ago last Thursday, we finished up chapter 8. And as part of that discussion, one of the things that came up in verses 2, 3, 4, and 5, if I recall, was a few questions that had to do with, there was lots of water. Where did all the water go? So one of the things that I asked John Sontag to do, because he's got one of these kind of brains, he looked it up, did a little bit of research, found an interesting article that I'd like for him to share with you, which might answer some of those questions that were asked. He has a science background, and I think even, did you specialize in physics in school?
No.
Oh, good. Would you go ahead, John, and tell us what you found out? Where did all the water go?
Okay, I'm on the clock now tonight.
You're on the clock.
Okay. Well, we talked about the global flood during all this time, and it's always interesting, well, where did the water come from, and what happened to the water after the flood? And it's always interesting when science catches up to what we already know to be true, right?
Amen.
So I'll read this article. There were several different articles, but this is the shortest one. Just let me read the short article. Science teachers may have to add a whole new layer to the water cycle, and we all know what the water cycle is of the Earth. Scientists have discovered evidence of a vast reservoir of water hiding up to 400 miles beneath the surface of the Earth. This discovery could transform our understanding of how the planet is formed, suggesting that Earth's water may have come from within rather than from collisions with large icy comets. I think that's kind of humorous right there, comets, regardless of what we're doing. The water is trapped in a blue mineral called ringwoodite that sits in the mantle, a hot rocky layer between the Earth's crust and outer core. That means the water is not the familiar liquid, vapor, or ice, but a fourth mineral form. We reported on this year on a rare diamond containing a microscopic piece of ringwoodite that bolstered evidence of the vast wet zone. It is likely the largest reservoir of water on the planet and could be the source of ocean's liquid. The study was published in the Journal of Science. The study is also remarkable for the discovery that melting and movement of rock occurs in a layer of the mantle known as the transition zone between the upper and lower mantles. Most melting was thought to occur at much shallower depths. Geological processes on the Earth's surface, such as earthquakes or erupting volcanoes, are an expression of what is going on inside the Earth, out of our sight. I think we are finally seeing evidence for a whole Earth water cycle, which may explain the vast amounts of liquid water on the surface of our habitable planet. Scientists have been looking for this missing water for decades. The studies, I won't go into how they determined where it was and everything, but ringwoodite here is the key. It notes its crystal-like structure makes it act like a sponge and draw in hydrogen and trap water. It could be a vast amount of water. If just 1% of the weight of mantle rock located in the transition zone was water, it would be equivalent to nearly 3 times the amount of water in our oceans, and some scientists say up to 6 times. So, if you ever wondered where the fountains of water came from and where they receded, there they are.
Wow. Thank you. If you understood all that, well, good for you.
We're going to get tested on that.
Well, just on the 8-syllable words, not the 2-syllable words. So today, now that we have that question answered, I want to move on into Genesis 9, and I want to talk about, I want us to discuss the things that go on in Genesis 9, and I'll connect a few dots. In Genesis 9, God is going to have a covenant, going to make a covenant with Noah and with his creation and all of the animals. Part of this covenant, though, is going to require that God give Noah some instruction. And so the first 4 verses of Genesis 9, in a way, deal with some of that instruction that God is going to give Noah about how he and his 3 sons and the 4 women that are with him, you know, there always have to be women with us everywhere we go. The 4, by the way, if you repeat that, I'll deny it. So the instructions that he gives Noah and his family have to do with how they should deal with and what their expectations should be for this new earth that they are, as they walk out of the ark, they walk down that ramp and they're taking all the animals out. It's a whole new creation, basically. Still the same earth, still the same animals, what have you, but it's something that they're not familiar with, so God gives them some help. And I'm going to divide this up into little snippets from each one of these verses, so we'll have time to cover this. Be fruitful and multiply. As I said, the world Noah entered from the ark was significantly different than the world that he knew before he went into the ark. Everything has changed. God gave Noah the same kind of mandate, though, that he gave Adam at the beginning of creation. That he gave mankind early on as man was taken out of the garden and was in the garden. Be fruitful and multiply. So God goes on and gives Noah some more information here in these first 4 verses. He says, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Well, as far as we know, God did not give that same kind of instruction to Adam. We think that Adam was probably was a vegetarian, to use our common word. We don't have any indication in the Bible at all that I've been able to identify that Adam and Eve ate any animals. Now we do know that some blood was part of that, and we're going to talk more about the blood here in a few minutes. But in order to protect these animals, since all of a sudden, you know, they're used to being friends with man, or at least having man not kill them for their food, anyway. In order to protect these animals, God puts into these animals the fear of mankind. The fear of you and dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth. So the relationship, something else now has changed, hasn't it? The relationship between man and animals has also apparently changed. Now animals have the fear of man, and now man is going to be eating animals, the flesh of animals. But one of the connection words that you'll often find in different scriptures in the Bible are words like but, or also. This word, but, in this case, tells us what God is going to expect from Noah and his family, and from man in general. But ye shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Yes,
Before we move on, the dread of you, and also protect human beings. Animal kingdom could take over. They're bigger and stronger than we are. And if they did not dread us and fear us, we would not survive.
That's why the Leviticus passages say, when the ox gores a man, he is to die.
That's protection for both.
Sure. Okay. Good. Thank you. Good. Okay. Over here? Over here? No. Okay.
If you've ever stood in front of a 2,000-pound bull, you understand.
You know, I've managed to miss that. Although I stood in front of some guys that had 2,000 pounds worth of
What do you say?
What did you say?
I don't know. Now, God is telling Noah, and he's telling us, and we're going to go into this in just a little detail in a few minutes, that the blood is significant. That blood is a very significant thing to the Lord our God. I looked, and I found only 2 instances where the word blood is used prior to Genesis 9:4. Now there's another instance where God uses the skin of animals to clothe Adam and Eve. But Moses doesn't use the word blood. If Moses wrote this, doesn't use the word blood, but he does here. God uses the word blood here in Genesis. He used the word blood in Genesis 4, verses 10 and 11. And that had to do, as you recall, with Cain, and how Cain slew his brother, and how God was reacting to that when he was speaking to Cain about what he had done. But starting here, God will clearly state how significant blood is to him. The Old Testament provides statements about the blood, which leads us into a path, or leads us down into a better understanding of the new covenant as it's rolled out in the New Testament. Now this chart, or this sheet, these 2 sheets of paper that we gave you, let's take a look at this. And I tried to organize these in a way that it would help us to understand how this idea about how significant the blood is to the Lord our God, how he builds on this as he gives us his word in the Bible. It's important, I think, to note that the idea of, you can read this top paragraph, blood is used, the word blood is used 424 times in 357 separate verses in the King James Version. Now, other versions may have more or less, depending on the translation. The respect for blood is not based on mysticism or superstition, but simply because blood represents life, whether human or animal. When blood is poured out, life is poured out. Let's look at these 14 groups very quickly. I'm going to go over these 14 groups quickly with you, but as I go over them, you'll see how we're building a case here to show the significance of the blood and connect some dots. Now we're going to connect some of these dots when we talk about the 5 covenants here in a few minutes as well. But so let's do that. Genesis 9, 4 through 6, where we are now. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require, and from the hand of man. From the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. Blood gives life. Blood was the sign of mercy for Israel at the first Passover. Because of the time restraints I have, I'm not going to read these verses. I think you guys can read a verse without my help. Exodus 12:13. Third, blood sealed God's covenant with Israel. Blood sanctified the altar. Exodus 29:12. Blood set aside the priest. Now, sometimes, and I've seen in quite a few examples, where this area of Exodus is about the priestly covenant. And God will establish the high priest for Israel through Aaron, and it will pass down through his lineage. But he also is setting the stage for the one who will be our high priest, the one who intervenes for us with Father God. And who would that be? Amen. Second page, blood made atonement for God's people. That was done by Aaron and his offspring once a year, as you recall. Blood sealed the new covenant that he had made. For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. Matthew 26:28. Most of you know that, probably have memorized that verse. So all of a sudden we're going from these other covenants that God has made with man, we're going into something that we call the new covenant. So connect these dots with me, if you will. Blood justifies us, Romans 5:9. Blood brings redemption, Ephesians 1:7. Blood brings peace with God, Colossians 1:20. Unless we're at peace with our Maker, how can we have a relationship with Him that's other than just pure warfare? Blood cleanses us. Oh yeah, Hebrews 9:14. How much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered Himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? The blood of Christ. Blood gives entrance to God's holy place. Blood sanctifies us. Hebrews 13:12. Therefore Jesus also, that He might sanctify the people with His own blood, suffered outside the gate. And blood enables us to overcome Satan. This is one of the things that we were just praying about for our two brothers, Bruce and David. We're doing some spiritual warfare, asking that God will heal them from this plague of cancer that's attacking them. And by the way, I'm not saying that these guys are involved with the devil. I'm just saying that we're coming in spiritual warfare against it.
I know not.
Against it. And Dale and Bruce would probably string me up if I tried to pull that out. And they should. Well, so let me just recommend to you that there are two other uses for this chart. I would suggest that you might consider taking this chart home with you and pulling out your, if you have the new Strong's Concordance, it's only about 2,000 pages. So I'm sure some of you memorized it, but it's got a long list of how the word blood is used in the Old Testament and the New Testament. If you have the time and if you want to go into that kind of a study, it's a great study to understand how we interact as saved followers of Yeshua, how we interact with the blood, and how God has used the blood to explain, in these verses, to explain His purpose for the blood and how He feels about the blood. And think about this, the blood of His own Son. If He feels this way about the blood of animals, how's He going to feel about the blood of His own Son? Okay, but it's a great study. I hope you'll do that if you have time. The other thing that you could use this for, if you're sitting down with someone and you want to go over things about, well, how do I know that I can be saved? Or how do I know what it is that's going to save me? Or what do I know, or what kind of evidence do you have from the Bible that this thing you call the blood is going to lead me to this point? This is a great tool. It's a great tool to witness to people, I think. Maybe I've got some pride of authorship, but I certainly didn't write these verses. I just put them in order. Praise God. Okay, so let's move on. Verses 5 through 7. God gives to man the right and the responsibility of government and of capital punishment. Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. My note here that I make to myself, according to God's command, when a man's blood is shed, there must be an accounting for it. Because, why? Because we were made in the image of God, right? Someone, as we were praying a few minutes ago, prayed about, they're made, Dale and Bruce are made in the image of God. And indeed they are. And indeed all of us are made in the image of God. So we have a right to pray for each other because we are all made in the image of God. One of many rights that we have to pray for each other. By man his blood shall be shed means man's life is valuable. Now I've asked Dale, who has a really unique understanding of the Hebrew, I've asked Dale to discuss the 6 words and to discuss the 6 words that might have been used here for the terms killing and or murder. Now, I see Keith is here this morning. I may even ask a lawyer to jump in and give us some further explanation about, well, how does government view the difference? How does the court view the difference between killing and murder? And I think that's probably an interesting point that our brother Keith can make about that. But Dale, you're on the clock. 6 words.
In Genesis 9:4 and also verse 6, he uses the word sopah. Sopah is a Hebrew word that means to shed blood in war. That's what it means. It's allowed in war to shed blood. Now, I'm not saying there's no intelligent argument for capital punishment. I'm just saying the text does not bear it out here. That's the Hebrew word for it. There are other 5 words for Hebrew that speak of murder. For instance, the Hebrew word sapat. That means to bring something to complete ruin. And you find that Genesis 22:10. Or there's the Hebrew word harab, which means kill. That means to actually take life. Or in Job 6:15, he uses the Hebrew word retzach, which means to murder a living idol. Well, how do you murder a living idol? It means man. You murder man because he is the living idol of God, placed in the earth. Or you go to Exodus 20:13, where we get the word murder. That word, you shall not murder, is actually strike down in such a way that, he can't get back up. It means a lot more than just killing the body. It could be striking down in tongue. It could be striking, this is why Jesus speaks of this in the book of Matthew. Murder could be, lying about someone, spreading rumors about someone. All that is murder. And God kind of includes that in that word.
Okay, thank you very much. So, what I found when I was doing some research on this is that there really wasn't a Hebrew word that would give us a real clear definition of government's responsibility or establishing a responsibility. But we have chosen, mankind has chosen to allow government to perform this duty on the behalf of citizens or mankind. Brother Williams, what do you think as a lawyer?
Well,
Killing and murder.
let me give you a little bit of background on Hebrew and Greek. None. But I will tell you, as you might imagine, from the legal standpoint, that's one thing I love about the Bible. It is concise, it is incisive, it is instructive, and it's so much wiser than all the laws that we have subsequently enacted. But in terms of taking another person's life, we have multiple ways in the law that people can be charged: manslaughter, negligent homicide, intoxication, manslaughter, the premeditated murder, committing another felony, and then some of those are capital offenses, like murder of a police officer, or murder while you're committing another felony. There's about 4 different elements that are capital offenses. The others are ranging from first degree down to third degree. First degree being 5 to 99 or life, and then third degree being 2 to 10. And so, in the eyes of the law, every state is different. They're authorized to determine whether or not they will accept and apply the capital punishment. Some don't, some do. And that has been litigated in the Supreme Court of the United States for a long time, whether or not that is cruel and unusual punishment. Another invention of our law.
And this has come from the idea of British common law and some other areas that we sort of inherited.
We inherited and expounded upon it.
Yep.
But we have also seen, as even back in the biblical days, how so many in our faith of our founding fathers were so profound, and we started with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that are based upon faithful principles and everything, and then subsequent to then up until now, we have had a huge difference of opinions of the application of those laws, whether or not they should even be enforced. We see it in an unprecedented fashion right now, not just with capital punishment, just about every other thing involving things of moral and principle.
Okay, keep that going, but don't run off. God makes a covenant with man and with all of creation. Now, He's already told man to be fruitful and multiply. He's already said that He's going to require death, or He's going to hold judgment upon whoever kills or takes blood. Brother Williams has already told us about the difference between killing and murder. As a lawyer, we normally always do. It takes longer to say it than those of us that are not learned would try to put it. The next thing, though, I want to ask is what happens in verses 8 through 11. Now, verses 8 through 11, in these verses, God is going to make a covenant with man and with all creation. So God's covenant is going to be with man, but He's also going to make a covenant with His own creation. And by the way, and with the earth. And what is this covenant? That He won't destroy the earth by water again, and murder and kill all flesh by water again. So I want to connect a few dots here, and I'm going to start with the question and ask for a brief answer, Brother Williams, about what is a covenant.
It's a different form of contract. You said be brief. It's a different form. It's a contract. It's different. A covenant is different from a contract that we have in law.
Right.
In law, you have an offer, you have acceptance, you have consideration passage. The covenant is I think, a grade above that because it implies a spiritual covenant, a promise between God and man.
Yeah, you're talking about contract law here, but I think that we could, in this instance, say that God's covenant with man really is based upon an agreement between two parties, or at least an agreement that one party that he will do something, or she will do something. And one thing we know about covenants, and there's really no short answer, so I thank you for your kindness and your patience, Keith. But there is really no concise answer to what a covenant is, but in the Bible, a biblical covenant generally is an agreement between two parties. It doesn't mean that both parties have to perform under that agreement, because there are many covenants that God gives man where it's a one-way covenant. It's just God is promising man that He'll do something. And He doesn't necessarily require anything out of that man. and we'll talk a bit about that in
The
just a minute.
Hebrew word you read, which stands for covenant, means partnership.
Yeah, a partnership.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's half of 50-50, it could be 60-40 or 60-30.
That's why we always address at weddings the covenant of marriage. But Dale's exactly right. It really implies, I think, in the spiritual context and also in the family context, the mutuality between the two partnership.
This is a great interaction. One thing we know about covenants that I think we will always find in the Bible is that there's no expiration date when God makes that covenant. There's no expiration date. So let me just very quickly go over what I would say are the 5 major covenants that we find in the Old Testament and the New Testament, just to help us connect the dots, and hopefully you'll see that there's a connection between the blood and between covenants that God makes with man, or God makes with the earth, or God makes with animals, but essentially it's with mankind in this regard. There is the covenant that God made with Noah, the Noahic covenant, promising to never again destroy all life on the earth by flood. There's the Abrahamic covenant. Somebody want to count these? It was issued by God to Abraham and his offspring. God, in this covenant, God is going to place no conditions on Abraham or on his descendants in this specific covenant. In Genesis 17, God tells Abraham that he'll make him a great nation, he'll give his descendants land, and make he, Abraham, the father of many nations. Third, Mosaic covenant. In Exodus 19, God issues the Mosaic covenant to make the Israelites his treasured possession among all people, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Then God makes another covenant with David, King David. Covenants between God and Israel were clarified and extended when God established his covenant with David. What is important, I think, one of the most important things about this covenant that God made with David is that it was an everlasting Davidic covenant that he introduced to include David's royal lineage into his plan, into God's plan. And then, of course, as we now just sort of leap over into the New Testament, we have the New Covenant. Now, this is the covenant that we all live under, the New Covenant. It's a promise God made with mankind that he will forgive sin and restore fellowship with those whose hearts have turned toward him. It was alluded to in the Old Testament by Moses, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and others. The New Covenant was fulfilled in the New Testament when God the Father sent Jesus, his Son, to shed his blood on the cross, to die, to be buried, and then to be resurrected from the dead. That is the good news, and God uses his word to talk about his relationship with mankind. This book, by the way, is not about us. It's not about us. This is about God. That's what we know. So God is telling us in this book about how he establishes his relationship and maintains his relationship with man. It's not always a good relationship, as we've discovered in Genesis 8, right? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about how God has used this word, the blood, to explain how he feels about blood and about how important, because it's such a dramatic thing for God the Father, his feelings about blood, because it is the source of all life, that when he puts his Son on the cross, he's really telling us something very significant. When his son sheds that blood, it's very significant. And it is a completion of all this. After the new covenant, then there's more information about how we live our lives as followers of Jesus, or how we should be members of a church, or whatever the case may be, and about the coming of Messiah again after the end days, and it's prophesied in the New Testament and Matthew and other places. So those are the 5 covenants that I consider to be the major. But of course, there's a priestly covenant and other things that establishes Aaron's, but it also establishes how these priests are to use the blood in the tabernacle. And there's a long, and it's almost funny. I mean, it's not funny. I'm sorry. It's interesting to note that Aaron, they put blood on Aaron's ear, and on his sons they put it on their thumbs and on their toes, and so forth and so on. So there's a lot of detail that God goes into when he tells Aaron how he wants to do this. Okay. The sign of God's covenant, verses 12 through 17. How am I doing on time? Right, good. This is a sign of the covenant. God says, "This is the sign of the covenant which I will make between me and you and every living creature, the covenant between me and the earth." 3 elements to this covenant that God gives now. And there's a sign that goes with it. Many times there will be a sign that will go along with the covenant. And this is certainly one of the cases in which there will be a sign that will go along with God's covenant here. This impressive covenant was made not only between God and humanity, but God made the promise to all creation, including the animals and including the earth itself. God makes a covenant with man, Noah. God makes a covenant with all creation, including animals and the earth. And what is the sign of this covenant? Rainbows. Rainbows. I'll tell you a quick story. I've got enough time. I'll tell you a quick story about the last time it rained. Year before last. We had a nice little thunderstorm, and our house is on top of a hill, and we were looking down in the valley, and as this thunderstorm was just passing away, going towards Fredericksburg, we saw down in the valley this magnificent rainbow. And it was the first time in my life that I recall where I saw the rainbow, the entire rainbow. Usually you just see a piece of it or whatever, but we saw the entire rainbow. I think Patsy took about 25 pictures of the rainbow in her camera. So the rainbow is a significant element, a sign of this covenant that God makes. Now we're going to talk more about the rainbow in our question and answer phase. Yes, Bill?
One time when I was flying across the country, I looked down and I saw a rainbow, the whole thing.
Yeah, oh wow.
Not just an arc, but the whole thing. That's what God sees.
Yep.
The whole thing, not just a portion. And generally the rainbow is in a cloud that's passing.
And we're going to discuss evidence of that in the Q&A part, the second half. God even says his covenant. Now this is not only a promise that God makes to man, to the animals, and to the earth, but it's also, I think, it's a sign of God reestablishing peace with mankind. Because when the flood comes, part of the reason why the major reason why this flood comes is because of the actions of man. Man has become corrupt. Man has become evil in God's sight. to such an extent that God even states that he regrets having done what he has done. And so he decides to make a change. And this is the way he goes about it. But God is a good God. God makes the change that he needs to make. Because, by the way, as you know, as we all know, this all belongs to God. It doesn't belong to us. We're his creation. We belong to God. God has the right to do with us as he chooses. God has the right to do with the earth as he chooses. God has the right to do with all animals as he chooses. It's his creation. It belongs to him. Now, he may limit himself by these covenants that we've been talking about. He may define how he exercises his rights, but it doesn't limit his rights at all. They're his rights. I will look on the rainbow, the peace that he reestablishes with mankind. I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant. There are other examples. If you looked at your question and answer, the questions we sent you, there are other examples of how God, what God may think about as he remembers his covenant with the earth, with all animals, with mankind. Frank will talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, I'm out of breath. Now, God is going to tell us about the sons of Noah. This is one of those areas in a lot of chapters that we run across that is a transition. We're going to move from one thought process, one pattern, one idea, and we're going to move into another idea. Because God has destroyed everything, basically. All animals and all mankind, with the exception of the animals that Noah brought on the boat with him, and on Noah and his family, his 3 sons and the 4 women that were with him, the 4 wives. So we're transitioning now into what I'm always call back into the genealogy. We're going to start now talking about the genealogy. And I want to encourage you, if at all possible, to be here next week, because there's some interesting things about the genealogy that we're going to start talking about in Genesis 10 that you may not have thought of, or maybe you have thought of it, but it's been a while since you focused on it. The sons of Noah who went out from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. That's probably something we learned in our first grade Sunday Bible class. Noah's 3 sons emerged just like Noah did, and the 4 women did. They emerged from the catastrophe, let's call it that, of the flood into a completely new world. So these instructions that God is giving to Noah also apply to Noah's sons. Because when God says, be fruitful and multiply, Noah's not going to have any more children that we know of. So who does this be fruitful and multiply have to apply to? Noah's 3 sons, doesn't it? Something happens. Noah comes off the ark, his 3 sons come off the ark, the 4 ladies with his sons come off the ark, and they start to go about the process of life again. One of the things that our verse tells us here is that Noah became let's call it a farmer. And one of the things that he does is he establishes a vineyard. And as people do when they establish vineyards, they ferment the grapes. And I don't know whether Noah knew how to make wine, how to ferment grapes, or this was something that happened by accident. My guess is, I don't know, that's my guess. So, what Noah does is he has a little bit too much of the vino to drink. He gets drunk, he goes into his tent, somehow he gets all his clothes off, he passes out on his bed. I think that's probably as direct a way as we could put it. What happens next is his son comes in and sees his father naked lying on the bed, passed out, drunk on the bed. I don't know whether they had ever experienced drunkenness or not. I mean, it's hard for me to believe that based on where the world was before the flood, that they didn't have spirits, alcohol, whatever, but who knows? So, what happens next? His son comes out. By the way, which son was it?
Ham.
Thank you. His son comes out and he does what? What does Ham do?
Tells his brothers.
He tells his brothers, but he also does something else.
Mocks him.
He makes fun of his dad. And when he makes fun of his dad, what is he doing? He's not honoring his father, and he's not honoring the position that God has put his father in. So God is going to punish Ham and Ham's descendants. But God is a gracious God. So what does Noah do when he places this curse? Who does Noah place this curse on?
His son, Canaan.
Yeah, Canaan. Now, I thought about this as I was putting my notes down and whatever. I always type my notes. That's kind of sick, but I do that. Why does it make sense to you that Noah would curse his grandson instead of his son? Why would Noah put the curse on Canaan and not on his son Ham? Ham's the one that did this, right?
In our vernacular, Ham was a saved man. God does not curse saved people.
God has blessed
There's a
Noah
better
and his
explanation.
I knew that.
three sons.
I'm sorry, Raymond.
It says God blessed Noah and his three sons. They are blessed by God, and now it would be hard to curse a blessing, I would think.
Oh, that's good. I like that. I hadn't thought about that. That's really good. What I came up with is Noah was telling Ham that his descendants through Canaan would be cursed. And how do we know that?
He said it.
What's that?
He said it.
Yeah, he says it, doesn't he? Where does he say it? He says it right here in 24 through 27.
But why was it cursed? Why was the son cursed and not Ham?
Well, it might have been prophetic because of the position that Ham's descendants would be
Well, there's
placed
a
in.
better explanation.
That's mine. We're going to use it.
We're going to go into that.
We're going to go into the rest of it here in a minute. So here's what we want. Perhaps Canaan was also involved in this sin against Noah. We don't know that he wasn't involved. It doesn't tell us that he wasn't involved. All we know is what it tells us that Ham did. And there are other explanations. One of them might be perhaps Ham and whoever was with Ham, if Ham was not by himself, there might have been sexual abuse involved. There might have been some other things involved that we really don't even need to go into. But what he does say is, as he explains what's going on, why this curse is so severe, I think it's prophetic, because he's saying that Canaan and his descendants will be servants of Shem. and will dwell in the tents of Japheth. Now you can see all that by reading this, these, what is it, 4 verses? 3, 24, 25, 26, 4 verses. May Canaan be his servant. In earlier generations, prejudiced people probably thought, and as a matter of fact, at the end of the Civil War, or rather before the beginning of the Civil War, this was one of the major things, these verses right here, one of the major things that the South used as their explanation of why it was okay to have blacks as slaves. Just a little piece of historical trivia for you. But that's not so. That was not the truth.
All of his sons were not black.
Well, that's part of it. It's because, as far as we know, the descendants of Canaan as black people probably came from Canaan's descendants probably came from what has been called Cush, from Africa. They did not come from the Middle East at all. There were no black people, as far as we know, in the Middle East at this time. Now later, early days in the book of Acts, we'll read about a eunuch that gets saved, and he was probably a black man, but that has nothing to do with this. And then to finalize, and then to finish up this real brief and real quick diatribe on Genesis 9. Noah lived another 350 years, and then at the age of 950 years he died. You've got to love stuff like this, because the Bible goes into such wonderful links to tell you about Noah and his life and what he did and his importance on the people around him and on following God's word and being faithful, as Hebrews 11 says, being faithful to God, being a man of faith, a man of his generation, certainly a man of his generation. But it ends it up, and that in itself tells us a lot.
Only Methuselah and Jared lived
Longer than Moses. That's right. Noah, sorry.
The third longest living.
1 minute, okay. I like it because the Bible tells us here, and in many other places, where it says, and he died. It goes through the whole line of Shem. The whole line of Seth. And at the end of each of their lives, it says, and he died. And it's making a real important point here. Man is destined to die.
It was appointed to man.
But what is it? What is it that keeps us from eternal death? The blood of Christ. God's grace because of that blood, and our acceptance of his grace by faith. And that's not a hard formula at all. Yes, sir.
If you don't think that God is a gracious God, look how he treated David.
Oh, yeah.
Murderer.
Oh, yeah. Adulterer, murderer, liar, thief. Thief? Maybe not a thief.
But he was blessed.
Well, he did steal another man's life, so I guess that makes him a thief. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that gives probably some of us a lot of hope. Listen. If you're not a sinner, then I want to come shake your hand. Because we are all sinners. But we live our days, and then we die. And then what happens? That's the point. And then what happens? It's insignificant that Noah died. What's significant about Noah? It's a man of faith. He's with God. We are men of faith. We'll be with him. And we're with God now.
This is